All right, we continue on with this series on the best and worst planets in Vedic astrology on the Asheville Vedic Astrology YouTube channel. And again, this is a supportive supplemental series of videos for the Asheville Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. We've already given some general insights into how to consider and think about the best and worst planets. We've looked at benefic and malefic planets. We've also touched upon who or what is the ascendant and the ascendant lord, and how does that relate to how a planet's going to function. And in this section, we're going to consider, well, what is the purpose of each planet? Because throwing around the terms good, bad, malefic, benefic, and so on, that doesn't help us so much unless we know exactly, well, what are we talking about? For example, many people malign the sixth lord or the eighth lord or the 12th lord. And that's okay, but it's not necessarily fair because, for example, the sixth lord, the eighth lord, or the 12th lord could work very well in a certain individual's chart because it supports their dharma, their purpose, their activity in the world. Just like we can have trinal lords, the fifth and the ninth lord, and while most of the time those just tend to be good planets for each ascendant, even those planets can sometimes get in the way of a person's path, depending on what they're doing within the chart. So there are all these nuances that we have to explore. And I just want to emphasize this idea of what is the purpose. If we take, for example, the idea of the eighth house lord, well, the eighth house in general deals with sudden breaks and changes, how one responds in psychological difficulty, how healthy one is psychologically. It can also show how one deals with emergency situations, how one deals with life-threatening situations. And having a prominent eighth house lord within a person's chart that's very active, it can prompt an individual to experience lots of sudden breaks and changes. It can inspire individuals to have to develop greater psychological well-being. It can also put an individual in more emergency-like situations. But if you're an EMT, an emergency medical technician, sometimes you want to have a good eighth house lord because you deal well with those kinds of emergency life-threatening situations. If you're a surgeon, you want to have this strength within the eighth house. So we see that the eighth lord itself is not necessarily bad just because it's the eighth lord. It depends on how it's situated and how it relates to the person's purpose and drive within life. Similarly, some of the best psychological counselors are people who've gone through a lot of trauma, which is an eighth house indication. So do you want to go to a counselor who has no experience with trauma and overcoming that difficulty and growing from it? Or do you want to go to a counselor who's been there? It's like, these days, and it's probably been going on for a while, we get people who become life coaches when they're 22 years old. All right, well, maybe this 22-year-old has a lot of insight and wisdom. More than likely, it's the person who's in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, who's learned to move through trauma and difficulty and grow from it. Those are the people you want to have as your life coaches, people who've successfully dealt with that. Not people who just, take an internet course and think that they know how to console someone who's just lost their spouse, or how to help someone get through the difficulty of going through the loss of one's home or things of that nature. So keep that in mind. But the eighth house itself is not bad. The eighth lord itself is not bad. It depends on what is the expression that the individual is here to experience. Sixth lord, sixth house is the same thing. Is that a bad or is that a good planet? Well, for some people, it can be very bad. It can put them in abusive situations. It can make them constantly in a victim role. It can make them caught up in competition in a very negative way, very often. Or, depending on how it's activated, how a person works with it, how it's placed, this can be someone who becomes a very good trainer, someone who becomes a very successful athlete. The sixth house and the sixth lord are very good for people who are farmers. And if you're a farmer, you know what I'm talking about. There's a reason that they say the sixth lord makes one either a soldier or a farmer. I've known a few farmers in my life, and the difficulties they have to endure, not even themselves, but losing crops, dealing with disease, dealing with injuries. There's a lot that goes into farming, which requires this tenacity, this strength, and this fortitude to persevere through the elements, through natural disasters. And soldiers need to have this quality as well. They need to be able to keep moving forward no matter what setback comes their way. So if you are in a career or a profession that requires that kind of hard work, that kind of tedious labor, then the sixth Lord is going to be very good for you. Firefighters, policemen, even lawyers can do very well by tapping into the sixth house. And even in our own lives, if we don't feel that the sixth house is working for us, we can use it, because we can learn to put ourselves in difficult situations to get stronger, challenging ourselves, playing a sport, doing some kind of activity that increases mental and physical toughness. That will help to turn the worst planet of the sixth house into one of the best planets. Or if you are in a lot of victim situations and you are attacked and hurt often, well, what the sixth Lord is calling you to do is to find a way to grow stronger, to develop boundaries, to learn to defend yourself, or to be smart and flee a situation if you can. Now, that's easier said than done, and sometimes we need a lot of help with that from other people. But if we can start to look at the Lord of the sixth in that way, we can create more balance within our life, and we can create greater strength within our life. The 12th Lord is another planet that gets a lot of difficulty placed upon it because it is a planet of loss. And loss can be very painful. Debt can be very painful. But the 12th house is also a house of liberation. And so the Lord of the 12th house is there to liberate us from the areas in which it is influencing. And again, this is one of the reasons why I put so much emphasis and attention on practicing Kriya Yoga, on practicing meditation, on practicing yoga, because that will teach you how to relate to this certainty of life that things will fall apart. You will lose things. And when that 12th Lord is profoundly harmed through Lajatadhiya Vashtas, or is not well supported by its friends, again, Lajatadhiya Vashtas, or has a low shad bala, or is not well placed, the person has a lot of difficulty dealing with losses, or they're almost destroyed by losses. And this, again, why practice of meditation, yoga, and spirituality, when done well, gives you a broader perspective of how to relate to those losses, of how to grow through those losses. And losses are never easy, but everyone has them. In some people's lives, they're more pronounced just because maybe the 12th house Lord is more pronounced. But it's good if the astrologer can encourage a person to find a way to consciously work with and make peace with that experience, because it's common to us all on one level or another. And sometimes we do need help through counseling or therapy to deal with those losses. But that is one way to tap into the strength of the 12th house, is by benefiting from a guru. I talked about spirituality, meditation, Kriya Yoga. Well, when you have a good guru or a good teacher, hopefully they can be an example for you or represent a way to allow you to move through that with grace and with poise. But also our modern gurus, our modern teachers, are counselors and therapists, because they help us see the experience and navigate it well. So when we think about the best and the worst planet, we have to consider, what is the purpose? Looking at the 12th house again, sometimes a person who's gone through a lot of loss, well, now they're able to help others go through loss. Sometimes people who have a strong 12th Lord, they're able to help people manage their debts. They become almost like a financial advisor to help people get out of debts. The 12th house can deal with the end of life. So sometimes when people have a strong 12th house experience, they might have experienced a lot of loss and death, but then that helps them to share with others ways of navigating it. Hopefully they grew strong because of it and could see the bigger picture of it. And so they become someone who's able to serve in hospice or serve in such a way to assist others go through that process or grow through a grieving process. So when we look at each of these planets and the houses that they rule over, they're all going to have something important that needs to be grown through or addressed or learned from. Many people can have a very strong second house, which can get them involved in finances and give them a lot of resources as it relates to, say, for example, the sign Taurus. But if an individual has a chart that overall, the ascendant, the yogas, the positions point towards developing spirituality, having all those resources, all that financial support might get in the way of them accomplishing their purpose in life. Now, how do we figure out what the purpose is in life? Well, again, you need to look at the ascendant, but you also need to take some time to explore the yogas and how the yogas are functioning, because there are yogas for wealth, artha, purpose. There are yogas for kama, enjoyment. There are yogas for dharma, service to the greater world and culture. There are moksha yogas for liberation and spirituality. And it takes a really good astrologer to figure out what those are. And again, this is one of the main focuses of the later part of the Ashevedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. But that's what's going to tell a person what their purpose is. It will also show what gets in the way of their purpose, what planets get in the way of their purpose, and what planets serve to support that purpose. And there's a lot of steps that have to be gone through in order to really get a handle on that and to make an accurate assessment of it. So that's beyond the scope of this video. But through the study of yogas, the understanding of yogas, that's where you get this information. So rather than make a judgment about whether a planet is excellent or bad or terrible or good, you really need to consider, well, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of the planet? Is the planet serving its purpose? Is the planet doing what it needs to do, or is it being hindered? When we look at generalities of planets, not just the lords of the houses, but the natural qualities of the planet. Well, Saturn is a planet that removes toxins. Saturn is the cleanup crew. You'll want to have that. If Saturn is not active within your life, your trash just builds up and your house becomes disease-ridden. Imagine a time when the people who take your trash away, if you live in a community or a city where you have trash pickup, imagine if the workers went on strike for just say 4 to 5 weeks, all your trash would build up. What would happen then? Well, Saturn is that energy which removes that trash. Saturn is the servant which works very quietly behind the scenes that you don't even notice until it's gone. So even Saturn, which many people consider to be very difficult, plays a vital role in your body. Saturn rules over the lymphatic system, the ability for the body to clean out toxins. Saturn rules the ability to endure difficulties. The stronger your Saturn, the greater ability you have to exist in life, enduring the difficulties of life and coming out the other end, surviving essentially. If a person has a very difficult Saturn and you put them in a survival situation, they might not make it. So Saturn is very useful in that regard. Similarly, Jupiter is an excellent planet, which tends to give one good information, good advice, good counselors, good gurus. Just because Jupiter is so good doesn't mean that it's that great in your chart. And this happens often where people have some difficulty with Jupiter and they always get the counselor that misleads them, or they always get the astrologer that never seems to give them the right information, or they always get the guru which is interested in other things than helping them spiritually speaking. So as we look at each planet, and we'll take, again, Jupiter for an example here, if Jupiter is not in a good situation, it doesn't mean he's going to work well. He might work quite the opposite. But that is why many astrologers recommend mantras for Jupiter, service to ministries, service to spiritual organizations, meditation and prayer, because all of that helps to benefit Jupiter. And I like to encourage that for anyone who gets an astrology session or takes astrology classes, because the more a person cultivates their Jupiter, the more they will be able to benefit from astrology, the more they will be able to understand astrology, even if they're not learning it. If they are wanting to get advice from a guru or from an astrologer, as they work with that Jupiter, that encourages that flow of grace, you could say, so that they get the information they need when they need it. So, at the end of the day, when you're looking at a chart, consider each planet for what it does. Don't look at it, don't single it out and say, this is a bad one, this is a good one. Decide, how does this planet support the life situation? And then figure out, is it working well or is it not? And in that way, you will be able to determine whether the planet is going to be one of the best or the worst planets for an individual's chart.